Welcome to the Agrihive Business Summit Series, presented in partnership with Centrecare CQ as part of the Australian Government Drought Assistance Package. We hope Mark West will give some real insights to make tactical and strategic decisions for your business. The value is in planning around this information. Share this video and join a new wave of resilient businesses as they grow with www.agrihive.com. Have a great day.
The idea of this summit, as James mentioned earlier, is really about coming up with solutions, coming up with ideas, thinking big and tossing ideas around rather than focusing on the problems or the challenges that are face producers at the moment. So James has assembled this panel which has a great breadth and depth of experience, both local and international, and I'm going to introduce each of them now. Some of these people you may know, some will be new. Rob Atkinson, I will introduce first. Many of you would know Rob. He's a cattle grazier and rural leader, and he and his family have been affected by drought significantly. He now heads up North Beef Incorporated organisation, and he's the previous president of the Drought Masters Society. So please welcome Bruce Atkinson. Rob McGavin is our next guest. He's probably Barcaldon's only olive grower. He's now one of the largest olive producers in the Southern Hemisphere, and he's come home to share some ideas from his industry with us. So please welcome Rob McGavin. Natalie Williams is a business partner and manager of her family's beef cattle grazing property, Granville, in Jericho, here in central Western Queensland. She's also a Nuffield Scholarship and investigated soil carbon sequestration in agricultural environments, particularly in the rangelands and semi-arid environments, and she joins us this afternoon. Thanks for coming, Natalie. Jim Geltch, who I've just met, he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Nuffield Australian Farming Scholarship since 2005. He himself was a Nuffield Scholar and manages a production that grows about 25,000 tonnes of tomatoes in Victoria. In 2001, he was awarded the Order of Australia for services to the primary industry. It's great to have him, and if any of you are considering applying for a Nuffield Scholarship, I'd collar him later. Please welcome Jim Geltch. And finally, but not by least, Professor John Cole is the Executive Director of one of USQ's strategic research institutes. It's the Institute for Resilient Regions, and that's what we're all aiming for here. He previously headed up a specialist sustainability innovative research centre also at USQ and the Australian Centre for Sustainable Business Development. It's really great to have you along, Professor Cole. I thought, Rob, we'd start with... It's okay. I thought we'd start with you. You've had a look at the Kidworth study. Sorry, Rob Atkinson, yes. We've had a look at the Kidworth study. You're living and breathing this as perhaps a similar situation like many of the people in the room. How close is this to reality, and what do you think should be one of the main prongs of the solution for Kidworth?
We'll go with this. I think I wrote an email to James when I saw the Kidworth study, and I thought it was a mirror image of what many of us are facing going into our third year consecutive drought, and that's why Donna and I decided to come along, because something's got to be done, and there are no easy answers. Politicians haven't got all the answers, haven't got many answers. They some of the drought subsidies have been accessed, but many are out of reach of producers, particularly out in these bigger areas where, if you believe your valuations, you just don't meet the criteria to get your hands on any of that drought assistance money. So we've been battling this drought now, going into our third year, and I think a lot of the speakers here earlier have talked about looking at the drought, but I'd just like to talk quickly about living the drought. And, you know, living the drought is, it's difficult. I'm 52 years old, and I don't know, the average grazier is supposed to be about 55, I think, so I'm below the average age just. But this is the toughest time in my life, and I'm sure it's the toughest time in many beef and wool sheep producing families' lives. I've never seen so many in our industry so under the pump. I've never seen strong, resilient men really struggling to handle it, because they watch the assets that their families, fathers, grandfathers before them have put together. They watch it withering away. They watch their wives and their children go out and feed and do a water run and knock roos on the head, pulling them out of dams day after day. They live every minute of what every man in this drought's living. And you go to town and you see, I live pretty close to 100 k's out of Hewenden, you see shops closing, a lot of vacant houses. So I know we're living the drought as beef producers and wool producers, but the people in our local communities are living it with us. They're not seeing the stuff that we see day to day, but their businesses are struggling as well. It really churns in my gut that we hear of record beef prices. I'm talking to a family in Texas at the moment in the US. They're getting between $3.50 and $4 live for feeder steers, 350 to 400 kilos. That's not EU, that's not PCAS, that's not organic, that's just straight out normal steers. They're paying 80 cents a litre for diesel. Well, those two numbers, those cattle prices and the diesel price, just spells it out for this industry. If we can't get somewhere near those sort of numbers on those two items alone, we're in a whole heap of trouble. Thank you very much.
So, Rob, it's something that you've obviously been thinking about a lot, you know, it's on your mind constantly. Is there one thing that you think, big picture-wise, needs to happen?
Oh, well, first of all, the banks have got to stop saying there's no problem, because by the Christ, if there's not a bloody problem, I'll walk to Burke. Every single beef producer in this room and every single local banker that works at our level knows there's a problem. Most of us talk to bankers from all persuasions when we go to town or wherever we go. Every single one of them will quietly tell you there's a major problem. But, you know, I saw an article yesterday that the Australian Bankers Association said there's still no critical problem in agriculture. Well, sorry, there is.
We'll go to the other Rob now, because Rob, you're involved in agriculture, but not cattle and sheep like many people here. From looking at the case study and hearing what Rob Atkinson has to say, is there much that the beef, sheep and wool can take from other agricultural industries?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and certainly it's fairly heart-wrenching hearing Rob talk, and it's a little bit hard even sitting here because there's certainly no magic bullet, and I think we all know that there's so many unknowns in this business. When you read the case study and you try and plan it out, because it'd be so tight a way out, you then got to factor in, is it going to rain or not? And, you know, just that alone is the difference between surviving and not surviving. And look, I sort of really struggle in this particular case to see the way out that isn't really risky and may or may not fail, and a really big question needs to be asked by the family if they want to, you know, really fight for this, and have they got the energy, and it might be death by 1,000 cuts, or they just want to sort of get out of it now while they, you know, and just start again. But I mean, I'm not really answering the question, and, you know, one of I suppose, issues with the government here in Australia is that we're really heavily regulated on the cost side, hugely regulated on the cost side. So the labour market's heavily regulated. We pay our staff, just talking about the states, we're minimum $17 an hour, they're about $8.50 an hour. Our health and safety, QA, quality assurance, food safety, labelling, everything. There's just cost up to here. And then on the downstream side, they just throw everyone to the wolves and say, oh, we're all free traders, let the market work it out. Let anyone send anything here. And every country that's sending agriculture here, or not most of them, have got no regulated labour market, no quality control, no this, no everything else. So they can't have it both ways. And that's my biggest beef with the Liberal Party, is that they're just mad free traders, and I think that's sort of part of the root cause. But getting back to, what can be taken from other commodities, where we've had serious bank problems as well in our business, in the olive business, and, we've faced, some huge challenges, and I've gone, once to the head of credit for Commonwealth Bank in Australia and, begged that we didn't have to raise equity because it would have diluted existing shareholders. This was a couple of years ago, and luckily he supported us, but, all the way through, and you can imagine the pain on that process. But I don't know, when you haven't got a strong market sort of position, how you can do a lot more than, look at costs and try and do things smarter. And certainly if you can get more money for your product, that's terrific. We're a little bit lucky in our game because so much of Australia's supply, but we've still got cheap imports and those sort of things. So I certainly don't have any answers on saying that with beef you could develop a brand, and certainly you could develop a brand, and certainly you could sell something for a lot of money, but you might only sell, 2 or 3 cuts. It's not going to be able to sell your 4,000 head beef herd or whatever. So it is a major challenge, and I'm sounding negative and defeative, and I hate that, but, reality is the reality.
Well, diversification is one thing that's often held up as a good business strategy for a rural enterprise to undertake. Natalie, I'm going to come to you because I believe you've got some diversity in your operation out at Jericho. You need Mama.
Sorry.
Yeah, we have. Our block at Jericho wasn't a family block. My husband and I actually bought our property from cash flow. So to do that, we had to diversify, go off farm, both work away to actually fund that operation. So our perspective is quite different, that because we're in other industries as well, we have a high level of comfortableness with debt risk and debt. So, and I guess having to make every dollar count from the get-go and not have any fat in our system, we've always managed our place, with low inputs, best kilos of beef that we could possibly get. So we haven't had this inherited history of culture that seems to cause a lot of decision making. And as part of my travels internationally for the last 3 years with Nuffield, I'm not sure why there's such a negative connotations around agriculture. Most other countries I go to, everyone's really enthusiastic and excited, and I'm not sure how much of, like, we get the forecasts, which we can manage. We've got high beef prices coming, so why is there such an issue around? It's such a contrast to the rest of the world of why Australia's got this happening. And we do have to take examples from outside our industry to actually innovate and advance. And I guess our mining company has allowed us to do that. Our other, trading that I do, share trading, etc., gives you an insight into how agriculture hasn't kept up and kept abroad of the other aspects of corporate or, large enterprise, how they run.
Do you think your diversification is your different point here? Like, if everyone jumped in and was doing the things you're doing, would it soften or lessen the effectiveness of it?
because we've had to, every dollar's had to count, I guess our financial literacy is probably different to, say, your average family farm. And because of the way we've had to be innovative with debt structure and what funding products we've used, I guess we understand finance, I guess, maybe a little different to everybody else. Looking at the Kidworth scenario, I mean, we were looking at buying country as everyone else was, because everyone else was buying land, so why aren't we? But every time we run scenarios, we could not make it work, so hence we never got in, because we understood that cash flow, we had to have the cash flow to fund that, and we were just dumbfounded at the time of how these people could be finding the cash flow in those businesses when we couldn't. And so hence we were probably some of the lucky ones that haven't got that huge debt burden now, followed up with the drought, etc.
Now, we heard from one of the earlier speakers, from Rowan, about, perhaps it is an important thing to invest in that R&D trip when you look at your business case. Jim, I'll come to you now. How important is education and that... you used the word and I've just forgotten it before, Natalie. That financial literacy is what I'm searching for, that financial literacy.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential, Nicole. And it's interesting, one of our media past board members of Nuffield regards financial literacy as the great constraint in Australian agriculture, and he's doing something proactively within Nuffield to try and address that. But if we think about where this family goes from here, it's interesting. I just wanted to tell a little story, if I could, about my own circumstances, and I think it may give... I think one of the first things that they have to determine is whether they want to actually proceed, whether they have the fire and the passion in the belly to proceed. And I suspect if you've been knocked around by drought and the live export ban, that tends to dim the fire in the belly quite significantly. But Helen and I have 4 boys, and we grow processing tomatoes, and at 4 o'clock on the 15th of January 2011, the 4 boys and I, after working our guts out for a couple of days, decided to walk away from $1.5 million worth of tomatoes about 2 weeks from harvest. Now, it was a flood situation, and we did battle hard. We lost the battle. But the really interesting thing is that the next morning we decided to sit down and have breakfast together. The 4 boys and myself. Helen happened to be away at the time, fortuitously. We sat down and we said, well, where do we go from here? And collectively, we said, we're going to give this a bit of a bash. We're going to really try and make it happen. It's now 2014, and perhaps towards the end of this session I might tell you where we're at now. But it still is a hard battle. But the point is, and the point I want to make in terms of this case study, is that I think it's important that if you decide to proceed, or if the people, the family decide to proceed, they need to have that fire in the belly. They need to want to do it. So just back to the question in terms of financial literacy, and as Tim Hutchings, the chap, in fact, Tim is a Nuffield scholar that farming, doing a lot of consultancy in southeastern Australia in the grain and sheep belt, and was very much exposed to businesses over a long period of time. And he still is aghast at the financial literacy of agriculture, and I think Natalie touched upon it a little. We really have to lift that standard. The organisation that I happen to manage is one way of doing that, but certainly absolute constraint in Australian agriculture.
Professor Cole, I'll bring you in at this point. I mean, you've been listening to the speakers beforehand and the comments made here. What can be learned from other sustainable businesses? Is agriculture that different to other businesses, or are there strategies that are being used in other business that could be and should be applied to agriculture?
There's a fundamental dichotomy in agriculture that I don't see in too many other areas, or to the same extent, and that is that you've got farmers, family farms. It's got a cultural, it's got a familial, it's got an emotional context to it. And on the other side of the table is someone who reads spreadsheets for a living and makes decisions based on not one iota of emotion, culture or sentiment. It's straight numbers. I had lunch with a funds manager on Tuesday back in Brisbane in preparation for today, and I talked to him about what I might talk about up here. And it occurred to me that we're talking about something that's insoluble using the current thinking that we have, because we're talking different languages. Banks don't lend money to farmers based on the farmer's capacity to farm. They lend it on the basis of how much someone tells them that land is worth. And someone like the Kidworths are supposed to manage their way out of this scenario that we have here, owing money to people that don't care one iota about whether it's a family farm or whether... So, I mean, we've got to divorce ourselves. And I mean, I'll talk about this in the morning. We need a very different way of thinking. And Rowan kind of took us there. It was interesting, both accountants, I thought, made some really telling points. And I congratulate both of them for putting really the real cards on the table here. Because this is going to require more than farmers trading their way out of something or managing their way out. It's going to take regions. It's going to take whole sectors. Like, I haven't been a Nuffield Fellow, but I've been a State Department Fellow in the United States, and 12 years ago went to look at communities that had collapsed. Whole areas. The Appalachia, Hawaii. Hawaii used to be a pineapple place. It's no longer a pineapple growing place. We looked at places that actually found a way forward. And I'll give a little bit of a hint about what I'll talk about. The answer always starts with the people in the room. We don't look to... I worked as a public servant in Brisbane for 10 years and on the water stuff and all of that. And I can tell you, you're not going to find the answers to central Queensland in Brisbane or Canberra because they don't even know you exist. My 20-year-old son asked me where I was going today, and I said I was going to Longreach. He's university educated. He doesn't know where Longreach is. So we have to get real. And so, I mean, that's where I'm coming from. It'll be a case of, yes, we can do things here. The Kidworths, I think, are probably at 30%. My advice, sell if you can.
So that's the first solution on the table, sell.
If you can, because their kid's going off, she's not hanging around. The wife has a university degree and might get work somewhere. As for the bloke, well, I don't know. But I don't see them in the current paradigm, in the current situation, being able to trade out of this mess. I mean, they shouldn't have borrowed the money. Rowan and Mr. Ringrose have already given us the answers. There's a lot of groupthink, but I think in that situation we can actually challenge that. But it's going to take the community, and my grandfather started a cooperative. I'm horribly old-fashioned. I actually think there's something to be said for rugged individualists actually working together and doing things collectively that somehow we're not supposed to do in the flat earth of rational economics. It's all right for oil companies to collude on setting a price for something, but it's not all right for farmers to organise themselves into regional or district level business units that are doing something for themselves being more effective, because it's going to take more than the power of just one farmer, one by one.
It's a very interesting point, and I think it's a great opportunity's point about the solution being in the room to remind you all that you're welcome to put a question to the panel this afternoon. And while you're thinking or getting your hand ready to stick it up, Rob, I'm interested in what you think about what Professor Cole just said.
I'll reserve some of what I think, but I mean, I know we mightn't be as financially literate as some businesses. I don't deny that for a second, but I don't think, when you make those comments, I honestly don't believe it's correct either, because you see some of our big corporates, you see their balance sheets released once a year, and you know, they'd have the best financial business in Australia, advice in Australia probably, they can't get it right either. See, when you're working with the weather, more than any other thing, the weather and being a price taker, you can't turn the irrigator on. I suppose you irrigate your tomatoes, do you? I mean, it's dry land farming is risky, there's no doubt about that. But I also think that if the Kidworth couple walk off, and that's what'll end up happening with 30% equity, because there's no buyers out there anyway. I mean, there's places for, you know, the minute it rains, the country life's going to double in size. That's reality. We all know that, don't we? And we all want to have a fire in our gut. We want to have our fire in our gut big time. But right now, there's a lot of people that love to brand their own product, because the call for the beef industry is make yours unique. People want to buy a story. We all know that. If you're in Queensland, you know where we got to take our cattle to get them killed for service kill? Casino. Casino is the closest place we can go to kill our cattle for a service kill. If you've got 10,000 head or more, you might get a kill at Swifts or Tees. But the corporates have got us. And one thing that I reckon's wrong with agriculture, not just the beef industry, is Woolworths and Coles are out there to satisfy shareholders. The banks are out there to satisfy shareholders. And our big multinational beef companies are out there to satisfy shareholders or their businesses aren't owned in Australia. I'd love to see, and we would all love to see, co-ops again. Co-ops were raving in the 50s and the 60s in dairying and potatoes and probably beef, but you hardly see a co-op now. You see a few in New Zealand. I think co-ops is a great way to go, but not everyone can do organic, not everyone can do PCAS, because even though the price is good, like when you look at the PCAS, you can't, you know, there's a lot of feedstuffs you can't use. If you're organic, you can't live north of the tick line, because if you're going to treat your cattle to get the cattle tick off them, you've done your organic, you've got to cross the tick line to get a kill. I mean, it's just not simple. I mean, I know I'm making excuses, but it's dead set not simple.
Well, I think everyone's unanimous on that. It's not simple. So we're really keen to start to generate some ideas. We've had the co-op, we've had for Kidworth to sell up. That's a pretty easy submission to make, or not easy, it's easy to, only takes, sell up 2 words when you submit that in as your solution to the case study. Anyone else on the panel have anything to add at this point before I go to James with the first solution suggestion?
I might just sort of say that certainly I'm really optimistic about the price of beef in the future. I don't think that's the problem at all. And the 101 at Harvard Business School, when they get everyone in there, is to look at every entrepreneur that went broke, and nearly all of them had a fantastic idea and just the timing was wrong, or they just ran out of money and 6 months later it was all great. And these things happen, and if you look at that family there, and hindsight's such a great thing to make you look smart, but if you look in hindsight, if from the 40s or whenever that place was born, each 10 years they had taken another chunk of buying something, or even each 20 years, but they bought nothing and didn't expand their business, and it's very hard when you're not getting bigger, because everything else is getting bigger. They put more pressure on, so you need to get bigger to get more efficient. And we were having this discussion in the plane to get your costs down enough so you can make $1. And, you know, unfortunately, when land prices aren't going up, everyone doesn't want to buy, because why do you want to buy it? It doesn't go up. And, you know, people who don't buy for 60 years then start buying. When they double, they don't buy, and then when they double again, they do buy, and this is the problem. And I think we all know that, but right now there's got to be an unbelievable opportunity to be the buyer there, not the seller. How do you turn yourself into that? And how do you know, lots of people with money come into Australia, and it takes a lot of energy, and it does take group thinking, but they need everyone in this room to manage the place as well, and you might be able to have a carry free in the equity. If the place comes good, you know, you get a big percentage, you're still in your home, you're still running it, you're still getting a salary, you're getting a percentage free, but all these things aren't for everyone, and they take a mindset change. And I think that the whole tie into the family farm, that's the business, the house, the everything, just makes it so damn hard. But I think it's a huge amount of opportunity up there, and if you could just, you know, buy as much as you can at the moment, you won't go wrong. It's just how do you do it and how do you get access to it. And if you haven't got the money and you got the skill, how can you leverage that against someone else who's got the money? And certainly this is almost becoming the bank problem, this farm here, and there's all sorts of way of, you know, negotiating out of that too if you're in such a bad position that, you know, do you want to buy it from the bank at that price or not? And effectively, if you're going to keep going with it, that's what you're doing. So if you think that it's too expensive, go and buy a cheaper one and, you know, get rid of that one.
Jim and Natalie, I'll come to you. You've both travelled overseas, and Jim, you've looked at a lot of what's happening in agriculture internationally. Is there anything that you've seen that's happening overseas that you can't understand why it's not taken off or being utilised here?
Brazil is a classic example. The farmers there are paid by the government to benchmark their businesses. One of the most successful farms I've seen in the world was an 11-hectare property that was making $65,000 US profit a year, with 5 family members fully employed. So if you don't think that Brazil knows what they're doing, think again. And so for me, that farm at 11 hectares in size with 5 full-time employees is outperforming what we're doing in Australia. Plus their government is paying them to be benchmarked and actually sorting their financial literacy. We're doing things wrong here. I agree with Rob about alternative types of finance. If the banks don't watch what happens, they're not going to be a big player in the ag sector anymore. Their funding products aren't satisfying what we actually need in agriculture to maintain our businesses, let alone grow them like they need to be grown. I've got an opportunity next month to work with one of the majors and looking at sustainable agricultural systems and finance for sustainable agriculture. So if you would like me to take anything to that bank as suggestions, I'd be more than happy to talk to people about how to do that.
So, Nicole, I think in terms of Nuffield and what it does, I think is takes people from their own situation and gives them a global perspective on agriculture. And I think what that does is over time opens up all these potential opportunities that are around. And Natalie's indicated one, but I think that every Nuffield scholar that returns will have an example that they can point to, they can bring back into their business to actually improve their business. And Rob, you know, I should be the last person coming from Northern Victoria coming up here and trying to tell you what to do, but look, it's. I reckon I've been there, and we are still battling. There's no doubt about that. But what we've done, and we talk about other sources of income. And I know it's, you know, where we are between Rochester and Echuca is not Longreach. But after we got flooded out, one of the most important lessons I think that I have learned over the years was that to communicate. And the first thing I done on the Monday morning was talk to my bank and talk to every creditor that I had and sat down and we worked through a plan. And subsequent to that, we've had tremendous support, unbelievable support. People, I think, you know, react if you're prepared to communicate. And the other thing we've done, we've gone out and looked for external funding, and we've been very, very successful. There is a lot of money flooding around in those capital cities, and we talked about, you know, this society that we've got around today. There's a lot of money out there. And if we can tap into it through perhaps initiatives that Natalie's talked about, you know, it's one way of recapitalising Australian agriculture, because certainly Australian agriculture needs recapitalising.
Oh, thanks, Nicole. That sort of brings up something I was going to ask that was brought up at the beginning by Bruce Scott in his introduction and asking us to consider foreign capital. What do you guys think of that idea?
I think it's a good idea. I mean, the whole question of equity as a basis to funding, if you like, the reconstruction of part something that's got to be on the table. To me, it's going past, again, the capital cities, if you like, and the existing, to look at overseas partners that might actually partner with sectors, whether they be regional sectors. You'll hear me say that more and more, the whole point of looking beyond the individual enterprise to possibly a group of enterprises. But I think we've got to look at ourselves as there's got to be alternatives to bank debt to provide the capital for this. And I mean, everything you read at the moment says that the rest of the world are interested. We've got Swedish pension funds investing in Australian agriculture. It can't be, a dud long term if the pension funds of California and Sweden are investing in the industry. So there is, I think, an opportunity for this conversation to happen, and for, again, farmers and their regions to be very much at the forefront and looking for and going right past existing sources to new sources. And yes, those new sources, I think, inevitably will be overseas.
Ditto.
Well, I think in the opening statement, I think someone talked about, Australia was built on British money coming into this country, and undoubtedly we need external income, external capital to make it work.
Yeah, well, as chairman of North Beef, and now pushed to try and get an abattoir going in northern Queensland, I mean, history tells a pretty sad story with abattoirs, unfortunately. But go back to the 70s and north of here, we had Cape River, we had bacon factory in Mareeba, we had a plant in Cairns, we had 2 in Townsville, we had 1 in Bowen, we still got 1 in Mackay, we got 2 in Rocky, but all those plants were there when all this Western country was sheep. Now now a lot of this Western country is cattle, and so there's heaps of room for a plant up north, maybe 2. We only got to see the backlog of cattle. I mean, up until now, for the last 18 months, anyone who rings a process has got to wait 3 to 4 months for a kill. It's very hard to destock a paddock when you've got to wait another 4 months to get your cattle on a truck. But those abattoirs will only, well, my opinion, North Beef's opinion, is it's going to be overseas investment. I mean, we got so much that can happen here, and the thing that's holding it back is finance. I mean, most of us said we wouldn't feed cattle this year because we fed them all last year. I mean, how crazy is it? We're cutting our production because we can't afford to supplementary feed. I mean, it's a ridiculous situation, but it's a situation the industry's in at the moment, and that's really sad. But it'll rain this wet season, and this country will come away better than ever because it's never had less mouths on it. And I think there will be a lot of overseas investment in our industry in the next couple of years, and yeah, it'll be great.
Rob, I'll just take away your opportunity to answer that one, but I guess maybe Kidworth should look at a Swedish investment company, and building an abattoir on their place could be one of the solutions to go forward. But in all seriousness though, Rob McGavin, what business plan does Kidworth need to navigate forward from this point, do you think?
I'm really positive, but honestly, I think it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts for them to try and get out of it. And every way I looked at it, even just saying they got no money, so could they lease it to someone, and it just depends on their drive and what they want to do. That's, absolutely says it all. They might be fired up to really have a good crack, and I hope they are. I actually hope they're not real. I hope it's just a case study of general, but I don't know that for sure, but I feel awfully sorry for them if it is, because just one decision got them. But personally, I think that they probably should decide to sell it and take that equity if they can. If they can't, it looks like just being low in their bank debt, you know, maybe that their bank's happy to take half the money and another bank will give them some money and they've got a viable business. But with that amount of debt and 4,000 head of cattle, and if you looked at a good operator makes EBITDA of somewhere around, you know, a good one, $80 to $100 a head per year average, you know, you just do the quick maths on that, that's 400 grand EBITDA, $4 million debt, 10%, nothing, you know, like it just is bloody tough. And then you think it mightn't rain and whatever. So, yeah, I think that it's, you know, hard, you know, awful hard situation, and I feel guilty even being here giving suggestions because, you know, it's tough to give those suggestions.
Rob, I was just going to ask, if that does represent, that case study does represent a lot of rural Australia at the moment, especially in the cattle industry. Given that people have sort of a custodianship over the land that they've been, you know, managing for generations, what would a capital injection from an outside investor look like from your experiences? And also, you know, if John's got any imagination in what that could look like, you know, would you be able to hold the asset and the ownership of it, or partner with somebody in the equity to sort of secure that opportunity or that business?
Yeah, look, it's not obviously not a 5-minute answer, and there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, and if it's a good deal for them and a good deal for the investor, it'll happen regardless. But, you know, certainly scale is really important, and I would suggest that if, you know, everyone in that area around the Kidmans put their place on the market and it was a $50 million deal, it would sell very, very strongly, and they'd all get, you know, frighted at how much demand there was for it. It's just because no one, the fund managers just don't want to get out of bed for anything under $20 million because they've got to do so much work and tick so many boxes and blah, blah, blah. The other option is to go to a rich city investor, you know, and find someone who wants to have an interest and whatever else. But it's a really difficult road to travel, you know, because which plays, when, how, what deal, you know, all of those things, and you're still a bit subscale. The issue here is that, you know, if you needed 2,000 cattle when we were kids, well, you probably need 10,000 cattle now, and then you'll need 20,000 cattle in the future because that's just the way it seems to go. So I think that all of those things are possible. You know, even someone buying it, negotiating with the bank, a different thing. They could have an option. Look, I'll give you a case study. A friend of mine who I work with pretty closely was in an awful situation, and it was to do with a horticultural farm, and they'd borrowed a fair bit of money for that. They'd developed the horticultural farm up, which costs a lot, and they got really burned on the equity. So they had $2.3 million in debt, and a property was really worth probably about $800,000 or so because of just the cycle and everything else. And the period that we got really hit hard in was the flood as well. I mean, we could drive a boat through 500 hectares of our grove. It would just hammer us. So these things always happen. But they actually, a friend of theirs, a wealthy friend of theirs, negotiated a price with the bank and bought it for $800,000 from the bank, because the bank were just, and they had no other assets anywhere, the people who were in the financial strife. They then leased it back from the rich city investor for 15% at his $800,000. They were already paying the bank about 15% for $2.3 million. The bank took a haircut, got it off their books because they knew it was only worth $800,000, and they had a 3-year option to buy it back at that price plus 10%, and they've just done that. So it's a, you know, it's things can be worked out, but you've got to be prepared to know that everything's on the line. If it doesn't go your way and you start having these discussions with the bank, you might be out the door, but you've got to get to that point first. You know, are you happy to say, well, if there's not this farm, there's another one cheap down the road, I'll do something there or whatever? And certainly that's a bit of an exception, because in horticulture there's sort of a lot of value on the farm with what's put on it, versus in agriculture here the core value is the unimproved land, or the land effectively. So everyone's probably more level with debt and equity, so the bank are probably likely to get most of their money back, talking generally. You know, not that they're going to take a big haircut, but I mean, things can happen, and certainly, you know, banks are concerned. I think that for a fact. I think you're 100% right.
Thanks for that, Rob. I think Bill Ringrose and I had a thought at the same time. Bill, what would you be advising them to do? What options do you think are the best ones for Kidworth?
I just wanted to ask a question, Nicole. No, I think that there'll be plenty of suggestions, so I won't do that, but I'd just like to make a point about the funding that we're talking about here. And we're seeing this in the Gulf country and a lot of the northern country. Banks are now prepared to take a haircut as long as you're off the books, so that's fine. Now, the majority of banks won't take on anyone else, because won't take you on because there's been debt forgiveness. However, if you can get through 2 years, 1 year to 2 years, they're happy for you to come back again. So there's a perception, and I'm not having a go at the banks. That's bank policy, that's fine. They don't want to be the nasty ones if it goes south again. So looking at these alternate sources of funding is a very important part of this strategy. I think the other very important part of this is changing the way, and Rob alluded to it, is changing the way we look at doing this, whether we need to own the land. Brew and I don't own the building we work in. Do we need to be owning the land? And do we have to remove ourselves from this idea and get to having exactly what Rob said? So I think that's where there's a fundamental change that we've got to think about, Nicole, about how we do things. I'd be interested if you've probably spoken about that, but that's just an observation I've seen on the ground at the moment.
I think I saw Anne Ballinger here. Did I see?
Yeah, Jim, if I could just fire a question at you. You said you went and got some alternative finance for your venture. Was that just on, without divulging anything else, was that just on interest, or was that on the package they offered you? I guess as far as Kidman goes, if he wants to stay on the land, he better sell off down to a manageable equity. There was one other point, but yeah, Jim, if you could answer that.
I think I got all the question, but so in terms of, we've got external working capital to help us out, just short-term working capital.
Yeah, but didn't you say you got from somewhere else except the banks?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so was that just on interest rates? Were you able to go negotiate better interest rates, or was it a better package?
No, we negotiated that with those external investors. Yep. We pay a bit above the margin for that, but we're prepared to do that short term. Really good arrangement. I think it's worked for both sides of the equation very, very well. We worked hard, but it's a relationship building thing, and this is the point I was trying to make earlier about relationship with your bank, relationship with your creditors, relationship with everyone you deal with. Your suppliers, etc. It's just so important that you build a relationship, give them the confidence to continue investing in you as a person and as a business. But the second part of the question was?
There was just a suggestion of that Kidman situation, like if they want to stay on the land to sell back to where they were. Yep. That comes back from, I used to farm over on the Central Highlands area, and we went through some fairly tough times over there. And this is the idea about getting outside capital to run your venture is not new, and we had some people look through our business, and it was suggested we sell one property we hadn't long procured, but we thought we'd be tough nuts, which sometimes stupidity helps in life, and within 10 years that property trebled. So that's the other issue we've got to look at. Like, the land is not just an emotional attachment, it is also your own superannuation. And if someone else can go in there and put money into your property to get a return, why aren't you getting it? And there's a lot of challenges out there. I'll just briefly, I went to South Africa last year, and they're downsizing their labour force because they've now got to pay $9 a day. So, there's some big picture out there we've got to look at.
It's worth, I think one of the key lessons I learnt in my Nuffield scholarship in 1986 when I travelled to the UK and Europe and Israel, was certainly in Northern Europe, was that you didn't have to own the land, to farm the land. And I think that was the biggest take-home message that I've got. And in fact, now I think we only own 30% of our productive land, and it's allowed us to, the capital that we've got access to invest it in capital that works for us. So in other words, irrigation infrastructure that can generate cash, and that's been very, very important. So don't see as important investing in land. The other thing is, the other point to make is, in terms of the Kidworth example, is that there is life after farming, and I'm old enough to have been through a couple of tough times and got a lot of contemporaries that you would reckon were dyed-in-the-wool farmers and would die on the farm, and at various ages of various circumstances have left the farm, and inevitably I've yet to hear one of them say it's not the best thing that they've ever done. So I just wonder whether that's something we should be taking home as well, and following on with Rob's comments.
Any other comments? No. Sorry to single you out, Anne. I was just picking up on Bill Ringrose' comment about, is it really important for them to own the land? I guess Kidworths could perhaps utilise an operation like yours if they wanted to leave their block. We've talked a little bit about diversification, but what about things like rationalising the operation, refinancing, communication? Any thoughts around these from the panel?
What I would think was with this family, they're so entrenched in their family culture, their family values, etc. I agree. I mean, even if you're an outside investor looking at that business, you'd be looking at the management and you'd say, this isn't a value proposition. I agree that they probably need to exit for the sake of how they're going to survive into the future. And whilst that's hard to say, if you read War and Peace, Tolstoy was whinging about attrition of land, of farmers going to the city in the 1600s, so it's not new, farmers leaving the land and changing their lives. So whilst it's awful while we're going through it, history is repeating itself. It's been happening since time began, since farmers started farming land. In terms of communication and stuff, they're clearly not talking to their banks, etc., or even probably listening to what their accountant's telling them. What was the other thing that you said?
Diversification and refinancing. Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't think that they'd be in a state mentally or financially to even think about refinancing. I don't think that anyone would back them.
I think I agree with Natalie. I don't think this is a refinancing job here. As a scenario, and James circulated this to get us to think as much as anything. I mean, and I'm trying to do that this afternoon and over the last couple of days. I mean, I've heard a couple of things this afternoon. We've got to somehow find a dryland model that works, that takes account of Roger's stuff. And Roger and I are colleagues, and Roger's very much in the climate variability space. He's a scientist, I'm a policy person by background. I come from the climate change world. If I was giving the talk, I'd be talking a lot more about climate change than Roger does. One thing we know about the climate change things is that it's not going to get any better. That this whole question of variability, and we were talking, Rob and I, at the airport, the extremes of variability seem to be something that seems to be more apparent. So whatever we do, we're going to have a business model that accounts for risk more rigorously than has been the case so far. And whether that's like being able to come up with, I guess, production sizes or scales of property scales or whatever that allow us to actually manage through that without necessarily ending up like the Kidworths have, is a question I have, and I don't have the answer. But in the spirit of what James has put out there, I also want to invite people to think about, is this notion that's been around since the 1950s, that big is better, is that actually delivering the outcomes that we want to see? I don't know that it is. My lot went out, by the way, we went backwards. One of my parents was actually carried off back in the 70s. So I've got personal history in this space. I know about it firsthand. And so the question I have on that one is, because the Kidworths did this, they went out like a lot of people when the money was available and a couple of good seasons and they got bigger. But it didn't help them. In fact, it almost sealed their fate. So, I mean, over the next 12 or 24 hours, I'm going to think a little bit about that too, because that seems to me... Natalie talked about someone, what, with 11 hectares? making a hell of a lot more money than the folks are with 65,000 acres. And at the end of the day, I think that's really very material to the discussion. So, you know, I haven't given you any more answers, but I'm possibly asking a few more questions, but I think they are part of getting to the answer. You know, the whole point here is firstly, to get the answers, we have to ask the right questions. And that's hopefully what James is trying to do here too.
I'd just like to steer off Kidwell for a second and look at the industry again. I mean, nothing can survive if you're not paid enough. And I heard Bill say earlier, you know, I don't believe the industry can cut costs much more than it is. We're down to bare bones. I mean, every other country other than New Zealand, you know, gets agricultural subsidies of some sort, and while we mightn't be in line for that because we haven't got a big enough population or whatever it is, everything here, we wouldn't be sitting in this room if we were paid enough for our product to have profitability on our side of the farm gate. It's that simple. We just got to find a way to do that.
And that's what we're here for today. So if anyone from the floor has any suggestions, what would you be doing if you were in Kidworth's shoes? Yep.
Hi folks, my name's Brad Sewell. I'm based in Dubbo, New South Wales. My business partner and I provide debt advice to farmers around Australia. We're both ex-bankers, and in the 3 years we've been going, we've negotiated $260 million worth of farm debt, representing farmers in their negotiations with banks. So I'll just give you a quick figures, a few industry stats. Basically, out of the $65 billion of farm debt, as at May, about 12% was non-performing of agricultural debt. Now, non-performing could mean just missing one payment. So that means 88% are performing, albeit some are doing it pretty tough to do so, and some are doing it very easy. And we deal with clients from the Margaret River in WA to the Barkly Tableland, right throughout Australia in all industries. I think with the Kidworths, the loan to valuation ratio on current valuation is about 76%, which is impossible for any domestic bank to take on a refinance basis. The equity alone is one of the triggers. Anything under about 50%, very difficult to get a bank engaged at that equity level or that security level. Loan serviceability is probably quite impossible with a number of cattle on hand at the moment. As far as the offshore banks are concerned, we have dealt with offshore funders. We've done... the problem with the offshore funders like the US and the UK is they do, even though their cost of funds are about 0.25%, they are commercial operators and they do their homework on Australian cost of funds. And if they know that the Australian banks can do it for 7, the Americans will usually try and charge 9, even though the cost of funds is about 0.25. We've been engaged with UK banks. They're generally around the same as the Australian banks. The problem we get with the offshore lenders is that their lack of understanding of agriculture, and so their terms and conditions are substantially more onerous than maybe dealing with an Australian bank. Look, if you're looking to sell your assets, the Europeans are showing a lot of interest. I've just had a client down in the Macquarie Valley sell $22 million worth of land, and he's been re-employed by the owners in Europe to run the property. He's only got to work 1 day a week, and he contracts out his farm equipment back to them. Took him 2 years to organise. That was after what we call a lot of stake wine and farm tour engagements, which we, as you know, if you want to get into this, you've got to be ready for some tyre kickers. It's extremely frustrating when you put your assets out there for investors to look at, that some are simply in it for the tour and the steak and wine that night. You have to basically engage with people that are able to weed out who's genuine and who's not. So yeah, look, that's just a bit of an overview. There is a percentage of the farm debt, and obviously Kidworths are in that 12%. I'd say they're probably within the bottom 5% of borrowers in Australia. But the reality is there's still a lot of people that are performing, as tough as it is. Yeah, so that's my bit of input. I'm actually settling on a deal tomorrow where the client's, it's a vineyard, The valuation went from $35,000 a hectare in 2007 to $12,000 a hectare a few months ago. To the client's credit, they've been very aggressive on principal reduction over the last few years, selling off farm assets such as shares and some residential investments, so their debt has gone down in conjunction with their valuation, and tomorrow they settle on a refinance and they're getting their money for 4.95%, including the margin, and that's a bank debt. So I think if you can work with the Australian banks, they are in the best position to work with you, but in Kidworth's case, I think that's unlikely. Thanks.
Any comments from the panel?
Yeah, look, maybe there's a little bit too much focus on just the ones that are just, really need a serious solution or to sell or whatever, and, maybe it's about the people that are more, around the 50% equity level, and, what can be done and how can you really turn from being the prey to the predator and take advantage of the opportunity, because, there's certainly one there. I mean, everyone knows the price of cattle's going to go up. No one really knows about the price of, land, because there's a lot of pain out there and all those things that we know. And probably just on the scale bit, it's my view that, it's probably more about timing why this particular case is so bad, and timing's absolutely everything. Even the timing of when they sold the cattle was bloody shocking. Not saying that they could have made, a better choice, but just as the way things happen. And when they bought the place, the timing was bad. And often in land, it's a big step when you need to buy something, because you can't just say, oh, I'll just buy this percentage or whatever. You need to buy the lot or none. So, but it's just one of those things where somehow I think you do need to get bigger to get your cost of production down and take advantage of opportunities. And I don't think it's, it's all bad, because if you just stay small, I think that you will end up out the door.
I guess going back to the Kidworth example, a lot of people in this room might be not quite in that situation, but nearing it, and the way to find solutions then can be quite cloudy if you're living it. So if my new friend, the QOB or the QBO, was right and it bucketed down on their place, what strategies should they put in place to stop this happening again? Anyone want to tackle that one?
What they should do is invest in themselves, go and educate themselves, use some of that cash. They'd be putting cattle on, but seeing they've fed for a couple of years, they've actually taken the grass down way too far. So you're going to have a delayed response from the soil and to have a body of feed there, which is all part of my Nuffield trip on looking at soils and sustainable systems. They would need to change their entire grazing management towards rotation, cells, etc., which actually increase your biodiversity plus the yield from your grass. So they've got to do a hell of a lot to actually turn that show around. It can be done. You see it all the time out here. And they also need to look at their marketing of their cattle. I don't agree with the co-op thing. Co-ops work when you have very perishable items, things like flowers, milk, etc. Co-ops won't work when you've got graziers that want an extra cent above what a co-op can give them. So they're doomed to fail. If we have a run of good seasons, the greed associated with individuals will always outride a co-op, a collective thought. So it's all right when you've got milk and flowers that perish and they have to take a price, but when you look at kilos of beef and that you can bush them out the bush gate when you can probably get 2 cents more a kilo, they won't work, which is why they've failed in Australia already. They also don't seem to have a maintenance program, and they should be reinvesting. I think there's a benchmark of about 15% on R&D a year. So I think that's what other corporate sort of businesses do and SME businesses do. So they're not even looking at at putting 15% of their gross income into R&D. So they're behind the 8 ball anyway. So unless you're doing those sort of things now, you're going to be struggling even if they do get a run of good seasons.
I've got a comment over here.
Nicole, Bill Luffin and Simon McCartney, lawyers. Rob McGavin made the observation that he hoped Kidworth wasn't a real scenario. We do a lot of succession planning, and the other one issue that hasn't really been addressed, that in this family there's only one child. If you had 4 children, all with ambitions of maintaining an interest in the land, it just adds another dynamic of pressure that puts more pressure on the overall family if their view is to maintain the family farm. So I'd like the panel's comment on the complexities that graziers, particularly in this area, have, where effectively you've got more children than properties. Thank you.
Well, can I just start by saying I think we talked about financial literacy being a significant constraint in agriculture, but probably succession planning is probably the other one as well. And it's interesting, we've been through a process, and I think that when I looked at this example, what was fairly obvious that there hadn't been any thought put into strategically working the business through, so an exit clause for Rob and Marg and where the daughter fits into the equation. So, to me it's just a no-brainer. Someone said today that I think only 30% of succession plans actually work. I see the succession plan from our perspective as being an ongoing work in progress. It's a continuing thing. We'll renew it on a regular basis, and again comes back to that communications, building relationships, maintaining relationships thing.
One of the best businesses I ever saw was in Argentina with succession. They have a succession plan that's 700 years long. So when you look beyond your next generation or your kids, it totally changes the way you view that land. So maybe that would make some interesting insights into how do you want your business to be looking in 700 years instead of 17 or 70 years. And that's what we don't do here, I'm guessing, because we've only been here a couple of 100 years. But we need to be looking long-term like that.
Natalie makes a good point about the importance of local knowledge. Again, more generally, succession planning is not just something at the enterprise or family level. It's something that confronts the whole sector. The average age of farmers, forgive me, I think it's 62 or 58 or something like that. So there's obviously an ageing population with the local knowledge, the knowledge we need to actually farm this land, even though it's just 200 years old, that knowledge. So we've got at universities, at University of Southern Queensland, for example, we don't teach agriculture. The reason we don't teach it is because no one wants to do it, it seems, or not enough people want to do it for it to be viable. So there's again a national challenge here, I think, again, that requires government, regional organisations, farm groups, industry sector groups, etc., to be working here on a common cause. Somehow we've got to make, collectively, Australian agriculture an attractive place for young, up-and-coming people to want to go and work. Otherwise, we'll have foreign-owned people owning the land, and we'll have managers working it, and it seems, on the basis of what we've got from people coming into the sector at least, a lot of those people might come from somewhere else because they're not coming from Australia. Again, a hard reality, but one that's not going to be simply family by family. This is something we've got to address collectively, I think.
Thank you very much.
There's one thing that I think of all of the agriculture I see around Australia in different areas, and that's there's a lot I haven't seen, but I've seen a bit. There's just one really unique problem in this area that scares me the most, and we've got a farm at Barcaldine, and there's two. It's the kangaroos and just how much they've just increased out of control. And I was looking through Mum's diaries in the 70s, and we always ran on our house block between 7,000 and 8,000 sheep all the time through those years. I don't know if they're drought or whatever they were, but it was pretty consistent. Now I think it's probably, struggles with 3,000 and the kangaroos, and then there's all these mites that climb up the sheep's legs, and they must be itching and scratching and biting, and whatever, and I don't know if they do it with cattle as well, I haven't really observed, but they're losing weight and whatever. And everyone else in Australia really doesn't have that problem. You know, if you go north of the range, they don't have that problem. You go right out west, they don't have a problem. There's definitely not that problem in Victoria. And so all of a sudden you've just got this massive burden of something else eating all your grass. And to me, one of the things the community, I think, should do is work really closely together to get the government to put R&D money or whatever to the right thing, and that's fixing the actual problem, and stop stuffing around with things that don't really matter. And you know, the kangaroo question's just off the table as far as fixing the problem, because they're native and whatever. But they bring in all these other problems. You can't even budget on your feed. You know, you really got to see the feed, go and buy a heap of cattle, eat it as quick as possible before the roos get it, and then hope like hell it rains or sell them before they get skinny again. And it just makes it even harder. So, you know, the dingoes are another issue. One enterprise is basically taken out. And I actually think that sheep in this country, you know, do really well. They really do well. And when you get a dry time, which seems like we get more of them, they hang on so much better. And, you know, the lamb market, the meat market, is so good as far as, you know, that opportunity, but that enterprise is completely taken from this area by dingoes, and the more people that go, well, I'll get rid of the sheep, the more dingoes that come in. And so it's just getting the resources to actually make it be a little bit more of a level playing field, this area to other areas, because that to me is the huge question mark about the real viability of this area, and, you know, particularly our place at Barcaldine is just how many bloody kangaroos there are and the other associated things that come with it, and then how many dingoes there are. And it's, unless that's fixed, you're thinking, Jesus, even if it's cheap, can you make $1? Because everyone else in Australia doesn't have the issue, so they've got a competitive advantage. You're selling to the same bloke at the same price and you can run half the stock. It's not a very attractive option.
Thanks very much, Rob. We might leave that as the last comment from the panel. All our panel members will be at dinner tonight and you'll be able to catch them after the session. Well, I just wanted to say, though, that while we're wrapping up this panel and we're wrapping up the formal discussion about the Kidworth study, it's not the end of the case study. And people have been given a lot of things to digest today, particularly, I mean, we hear about different sectors in isolation, but to pull them all together on one day and get an overall picture can take quite a lot of digesting and can bring up, you know, plenty of thoughts and emotions and handbrakes and ideas for people. And I don't think we should forget that this Kidworth case study, as we've heard in the room, is not that dissimilar to what is actually happening out there. Professor John Cole hit the nail on the head when he said the solution is in the room, and while it may not be coming to you at this minute in front of a public setup, you can still submit your ideas for this case study, and let's use today as a launching pad to get together more and discuss solutions, because one good idea can breed another good idea that could breed the good idea, which is what getting together today is all about. So in conclusion, let's thank our panel, Professor John Cole, Natalie Williams, Jim Geltch, Rob Atkinson and Rob McGavin for coming.
People can create real opportunities for each other, and I implore you to join Agrihive as a platform to be able to explore those opportunities and to build resilience in our rural regions.